Maverick News. The world is watching. In a universe full of ideas, we draw lightness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left, positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes strange bedfellows.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Strange Bedfellows. I'm your host, Lori Spencer, with my co-host, Rick Walker, the one and only from Maverick News.
And I'm the strange one.
No, I'm the strange one. Actually, we're both strange. That's why we make Strange Bedfellows, right?
That's right.
We always have strange people on this show, but a good kind of strange, you know? But we're all pretty strange.
Yeah, we're all unique.
And, that's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. And we have a great guest joining us today.
Yes, we do. Our Maverick News correspondent all the way over in Crimea, Russia or Ukraine, depending on which side of the war you're on, I guess. It's disputed territory. And that's kind of the whole part of the topic that we're talking about tonight is disputed territories that lead to world wars. And Kevin's right over there in the thick of it between Russia and Ukraine and that disputed peninsula. And, of course, another disputed peninsula over in the Middle East is blowing up. And, Rick, since the attacks, October 7th on Israel by the Hamas terrorists, man, it's been almost a month ago now.
Wow.
A month ago this week. Wow.
Yeah.
What a month it's been. And all the resulting carnage that we've witnessed since with all these Israeli airstrikes on Gaza. The topic of the show tonight is, we're seeing an alarming rise in anti-Jewish sentiment all around the world. And the title of tonight's show, episode 19, is Never Again? ? Antisemitism rising. And, there have been reports of, we've seen it. We've seen all these pro-Hamas or pro-Palestine demonstrations. We've seen synagogues around the world being defaced with swastikas and all kinds of anti-Jewish hate posted online. If you're on social media at all, you can't miss it. And something else you can't miss if you're really paying attention is that neo-Nazis, white supremacists, have been contributing to all this anti-Semitic chatter online. And oftentimes you hear the same rhetoric that you hear from Hamas. It's like they're in complete agreement with one another. Even right now, even people who don't even care about the plight of the Palestinian people feel emboldened right now to just openly express their hatred of Jews. And it's not just in the United States. We've been talking about it all week on Maverick News up in Canada. You've got that new Nazi party in Canada. Tell our viewers just a brief version of what our week has been like at Maverick News if they haven't been watching.
Well, it's something that we've been following closely for at least the last 8 months or so, maybe longer. It's a First Nations-based anti-Semitic ethno-nationalist political movement that is poised to become a national party. They're filing paperwork to do that. It's going to be called the Thunderbird Nationalist or Naturalist Party. The ideology is inspired by, rooted in the same ideology that we saw, that we witnessed in World War II with Nazi Germany. In fact, the founder, Adrian the Realist,
Adrian the Fascist is what I call him.
Yeah, little Adolf.
Little Adolf.
He's made very specific references in various social media posts and interviews to Hitler, to you know, to the ideology. He absolutely has made it clear that he does not like Jews. He said so right on this program. I think the second time we had him on, and I've had him on multiple times, not because I want to promote anything that he's doing, but because he is getting some traction, enough that it is absolutely something we need to be concerned about. So we've exposed it because it is accelerating.
Yeah, we interviewed him on Halloween, which I thought was very appropriate.
Yes.
The booking time just worked out perfectly. Yeah. I mean, that's the scariest thing I can think of.
It's complex, it's a complex thing, because what I'm seeing is it's anti-Semitism, but in a very Western, it's not a Western thing, it's a global thing. Anti-Semitism is not necessarily just about the Jews. It's more complex than that. It's a postmodern phenomenon that it's postmodernism, and so they've been working up to this, Laurie. If you look at the narratives that have been playing out over the last, especially 3 years, accelerated because of the oppression that came with the pandemic.
Right.
The twisted, disguised language, or the language used to disguise the anti-Semitism, is now being displayed in a more blatant, obvious, unmasked way.
I'll say. And it's taking all these new twists and turns that there is no historical precedent for, like, for example, the new Thunderbird Nationalist Party there with the First Nations being involved. I mean, this isn't the usual suspects. Usually you would expect white supremacists, right?
You would.
These are Native American Nazis. I mean, that's a new one on me.
Perhaps, but it makes absolute sense, because people need to understand that prejudice and bigotry is not isolated to a single ethnicity. It's prejudice, prejudging, and it's about favoring your tribe, if you will. And I don't mean that in a First Nations way specifically. I mean whatever tribe you may belong to, even globally. So we'll get into it more on the broadcast. It absolutely makes sense, though, when you really kind of dig down into it, because it's anti-Semitism is rooted in prejudice and bigotry and hate. And what you see too is the same motivating factors that come with the desire to liberate. It's even those things emotionally and ideologically, you're walking a fine line there, because as you try to liberate, those same motivations can take you to a very dark place where you end up oppressing. So this is why you end up with these people who have good intentions to begin with, but their ideology leads them into the abyss. It's a complex psychological and ideological thing, but we're witnessing that right now.
And even though you've been working this story here at Maverick News and following Adrian and the origins of this Thunderbird party for several months, it's taken kind of a new twist, and it's echoing what we're hearing coming out of the Middle East and what you hear from Hamas. How they talk about their stolen land, and they're going to reclaim it. Yeah, colonialism. Yes.
It's postmodernism, postmodernist political ideological theory, critical race theory. It's these things converging, and it plays into this globalist agenda, but it's anti-colonialism, and then different political powers, different countries, they latch onto this, they exploit it, they capitalize on it to further their interests politically around the globe, whether it's Russia, the United States, China, India, Australia, it doesn't matter. They're all involved in it, but there is absolutely choreography that's going on here, and that's why these things are converging right now. And you can see that this, if you boil it right down, it's the same issues in Israel Palestine that are playing out right here in Canada, between
Exactly.
First Nations, the government, the settlers. It
Mhm.
really boils right down to the exact same issues. Or even if you go to Barbados, where they decided to decouple from the monarchy. So
Right.
these things all are interconnected, and it all goes back through history, where the roots of all this started with, Christopher Columbus coming over. So
Mhm.
it goes back that far, and it's all intertwined.
We are all on stolen land. That's the bottom line. And
Even
over the
even
sorry, I was
Hamas
going to say,
yesterday. I'm sorry. Even Hamas yesterday says that Spain is stolen land, and now we have to give back Spain.
wow,
Where are the people supposed to go? There won't be any room for any humans at
where does
all
it
anymore on the
stop?
planet.
Yeah, where does it stop? And
Yeah.
just over the weekend, there was that pro-Palestinian mob, shouting anti-Semitic slogans and demanding to know where the Jews were, storming the airport, excuse me, in Dagestan, which is a mostly Muslim republic and tonight. So I wanted to bring on Strange Bedfellows, our Maverick news correspondent over there in Russia, over in Crimea, Kevin Michelizzi. He's an American living on a disputed tract of land currently being fought over between Russia and Ukraine. And I want to discuss, the reason that Israel was created in the first place in 1948. We've got some history to talk about tonight, folks. We're going to talk about the history of the Jews in Ukraine, in Poland, in the former USSR, the pogroms that led to the Holocaust, and the collaboration of the Arabs and the Palestinians with the Nazis in World War II. Kevin will also give us more details on the aftermath of the Dagestan riot, Putin's expression of support for the people in Palestine, and also he's going to address some of these Western allegations of anti-Semitism in Russia today. You hear a lot about the Nazis in Ukraine, but there is some Nazism in Russia as well. We'll find out if that's over-exaggerated propaganda from the West or if there's some truth to it. And, this week, November 9th, will mark it's been going on for 30 years now, since the fall of the Soviet Union, the International Day Against Fascism and Anti-Semitism. It's an annual event every year on November 9th, honoring the victims of the Kristallnacht Nazi pogrom of 1938, and more broadly, victims of the Holocaust and fascism throughout history everywhere. So tonight, we hope to raise awareness about the dangers of nationalism, racism, anti-Semitism, and neo-Nazism today, because they're saying the quiet part out loud now. And we all know where that leads. So I'd like to bring in our guest from Russia, beautiful Russia, where it's in the afternoon over there, I believe. Hey, Kevin.
It is. Hey,
Good to
Rick.
see
Hey,
you.
Lori.
Hey, Kevin.
So,
Welcome
hey,
back.
thanks. Rick was talking about the First Nations people. I wonder if they realize that they stole land too. The original inhabitants of Canada actually crossed the land bridge from Russia. They were the Chukchuk Indians.
Right.
So how far back do you go in history before you determine who stole what from whom?
Actually, you just hit on exactly the thing I wanted to share with people. So I was going to do it later, but I'll do it right now. Will only take a moment. Okay, all of these arguments about who was here first, it's all a bunch of hooey.
Bunch of malarkey, man.
Okay, because look at this. All right, just look at this. The world is just a big jigsaw puzzle. Let's go back, say, 160 million or 200 million years.
Right.
And, everything was connected.
All that land was stolen from somebody somewhere sometime, then stolen by the next guys who stole it from those guys.
Or maybe just maybe the point is that we're all just on the land, and it was all one big land mass at one point that split apart, and then it drifted apart because of tectonic shifts.
That's
So how far back you want to go?
Great
We're all
point.
human beings, and we all
190
came from
million
the earth.
years, Rick.
190 million years. Okay.
Yeah.
I
10
want to go
million years
195.
before your picture starts.
Well,
you
here
know,
on Strange
it's-
Bedfellows, we just, since it's a Saturday show, Saturday night, we kind of like to catch you up on the news of the week. And boy, it's been an eventful week. There's been so much going on. When we're talking about the rise of anti-Semitism, we see it really exploding over in Europe, which for students of history like me is pretty scary, especially when you see it happening in places like Vienna, Austria. Yikes. Take a look at
As we
this,
continue to
guys.
follow the breaking news out of the Middle East, you are looking at live pictures of a group gathered in Ramallah after Friday prayers. There have been a series of significant protests over the course of the last several weeks. We will continue to monitor what's happening here as well. At the same time, there has been a significant increase of anti-Semitic acts in both the United States and around the world since that October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel. FBI Director Chris Wray said this week that anti-Semitism is reaching, quote, historic levels in the U.S. In Austria, the Jewish community has been targeted in an incident that carries disturbing reminders of the past. CNN's Frederick Pleitgen joins us now from Vienna. Fred, reading about this cemetery holds extra significance for Jews in the area. The room where you stand was actually burned down last in 1938 by the Nazis.
Yeah, it certainly was, and it's definitely something that's extremely troubling to the Jewish community here in Austria, and specifically, of course, here in Vienna. You can look around. I'm actually inside that ceremonial hall that was set on fire. You can see that the windows there that have been destroyed to then obviously put fire here into the room, that those have been sort of patched up a little bit. But everything that was inside, including very valuable scriptures for the Jewish community here in Vienna, was destroyed. This is an incident that happened here in Vienna, but it's also part of what many Jews in Europe are seeing as a huge, steep rise in anti-Semitic incidents that has a lot of folks here on the continent very worried. Here's what we're seeing.
Valuable Torah scrolls and prayer books reduced to ashes after an arson attack on this ceremonial hall on the Jewish part of Vienna's main cemetery. The last time this very hall was set on fire was almost to the day 85 years ago by the Nazis on Kristallnacht, Chief Rabbi Yaron Engelmeyer tells me.
How big is the damage, not just in terms of obviously the room itself, but spiritually for you, for the Jewish community here?
I think it takes us back to times where the books were burned, and it is an attack on the spiritual values of the religion and of humanity, which happened here.
A swastika on the outer wall leaves few questions about the anti-Semitic nature of the attack.
It should worry us, all of the people in the free world, about what's going on in the streets right now, and anti-Semitic attacks are just the top of what's going on.
Since Hamas's October 7th attack on southern Israel, murdering more than 1,400 people and kidnapping hundreds, and Israel's military response in Gaza, which has also caused many casualties, anti-Semitic incidents have skyrocketed by about 300% in Austria, the head of Vienna's Jewish community tells me.
We are anxious. People are thinking about their life. The first thinking is Jewish life possible in Austria? The second thinking is Jewish life possible in Europe or in the world?
With pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel demos sweeping across the continent, Jewish groups say anti-Semitism is not only getting more prevalent, but uglier. From plastering Stars of David on Jewish homes in Paris to a Molotov cocktail attack on one of the main synagogues in Berlin, and near daily assaults and insults in various European countries. Today, just hours after the cemetery attack, Vienna's Jewish community hosted Israelis whose relatives were killed or kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th.
Was cousin.
In Tal Yeshurun's family, 4 murdered, 7 kidnapped. Tal lives in Europe, but while he's publicly advocating for the hostages in everyday life, he feels he has to hide his Jewish identity.
Not to be associated with anything written in Hebrew, not to speak Hebrew, not to go to places where considered Jewish, like a synagogue or things like that.
While many European leaders have come out strongly against the rising tide of anti-Semitism, the head of the European Jewish Association says it's not enough.
We know exactly when we are in danger, and we are now in danger. European leaders, we need you right now to act. Never again is now, not tomorrow, not next week, is now.
But as much as there is fear, there's also a sense of defiance. Rabbi Engelmeyer himself painting over the Nazi slurs on the cemetery wall, eager to show his Jewish community will not be intimidated by anti-Semitic attacks.
And you know, Phil, the Jewish community here in Vienna certainly got a boost also last night when there was a Sea of Light memorial that took place where thousands of people showed up to show solidarity with Israel, but of course, first and foremost, also with the hostages that are still being held by Hamas, guys.
Really important story. Fred Pleitgen, thank you.
Can you even imagine being Jewish at that cemetery that's been burned down before on Kristallnacht, burned down again, and having to paint over the swastikas painted on the wall?
Look, there's a problem here, right? Because you just ran a CNN report, which is mainstream media, and you can't trust the mainstream media, and the mainstream media is owned by the elites. And who is the elites? The elites are who controls the media?
Jews.
Juden.
So you just ran a bunch of Jewish propaganda anyway, so nobody's going to believe what you just told them.
Right.
You know, the guy who was talking about, not wanting to look Jewish, I've got some friends in the UK where at work they were told, do not dress like Jews, do not talk like Jews, do not give anybody the idea that you're Jewish at all. So...
In Crimea?
No, UK.
In the UK.
Yeah.
It's a problem everywhere. And speaking of the UK, I wanted to show you, Kevin, how the British are covering the report of the riot at the airport in Dagestan this week. Of course, this is how they would spin it. I did bring some mainstream media reports so that we can pick them apart, so that our viewers can evaluate all the various types of propaganda that we're seeing in different parts of the world, right? You just saw how the American media is reporting it. That's CNN out of their bureau.
But before you show this one, let's point out that also sometimes mainstream media gets it right.
Well, yes.
Propaganda is about truth with a little bit of falsity in it. So a lot of what was in that report was correct.
Of course.
That's
It happened, folks. They're not making it up, but it happened. And they do have some decent reporters in their bureaus around the world.
Things are discredited, right? It's just like...
I thought the guy did a pretty good job.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
It's a solid report. We'll see what you think of this one. This is Britain's Channel 4.
The social media mob went all real world in Dagestan yesterday evening. A crowd of hundreds stormed the airport in the capital city, Makhachkala, at around 7 p.m. A plane was arriving from Tel Aviv. Unsubstantiated rumors amplified on Telegram channels said that there were Jewish refugees on board fleeing the war in the Middle East. The mob was headed for that plane, now sitting on the runway. The Russian Republic of Dagestan is majority Muslim, has no recent history of extreme displays of anti-Semitism, though, at least nothing like this. The crowd first got through into the airport concourse, marauding through security. Their intent was clear from the chanting. They were looking for Jewish people. Frightened airport staff are heard saying there's no one here. The mob heads out onto the runway. Terrified passengers on a plane watch the crowd arrive. The pilot makes an announcement. There's an angry mob outside, he says, trying to figure out where we've come from. It's likely we might get hurt. Don't try to open the doors. The crowd eventually focus on this plane, believing it's the one that's arrived from Tel Aviv. A technician on the ground is asked, are the people on board Russian or Jewish? They interrogate others, asked to see passports. Eventually, security services arrive and start arresting people. Dagestan is one of the Russian republics. It's situated between the Black Sea and the Caspian, shares borders with Georgia and Azerbaijan. It's majority Muslim, but ethnically diverse, has a tiny Jewish population. Today, Vladimir Putin said the incident was orchestrated by the West and Ukraine, aimed at undermining the unity of the Russian Federation. There is another perspective, though. As with many of the poorer Russian republics, Dagestan is feeling the squeeze economically and is sending thousands of soldiers into what's becoming, for so many young men, the killing fields of Ukraine.
So all these factors, I think, are causing the Russian government to try and deflect attention from that problem to, they would rather create a divisive divide and rule situation rather than have some sort of unification amongst the different ethnic groups against Moscow. So I think we're entering quite a dangerous phase in North Caucasus, where it's not just in Dagestan, remember, there was also in Kabardino-Balkaria attacks on the Jewish center in the capital. And again, I do believe this was engineered by the FSB to try and deflect attention from a growing movement of Circassian nationalism in the North Caucasus.
Were there ulterior motives behind last night's rampage is one question. If you were Jewish, running the gauntlet of the mob as you left the airport, here's another question. What would they have done if they'd found me?
Oh, wow. Orchestrated by the FSB?
Yeah.
Kevin, they're blaming each other, of course, right? Russia's
Of course.
blaming Ukrainian intelligence and they're blaming Russian intelligence. What's your take? You're there on the ground in Russia. Tell us.
Well, first, let me correct what Putin said in the video that they showed. What he was saying at that time was, I have to ask a question. Is it possible to help Palestine by attacking people? He went on and said, after the Hamas attack, Israel has the right to protection. But he called for a solution to the Palestine-Israeli conflict through peaceful negotiations. So they respun what he actually said.
Of course they did.
Yes, there was a mob. It's always a mob. They estimate there were 500 people there, plus or minus.
Looks about
and
right.
Yeah. Now,
Hundreds.
it's the same as with the hotel. Same 500 guys. So there was a rally that morning that was coordinated by this Telegram channel, Morning Dagestan, in support of Palestine. It was held in Cherkassk. And they were, call them what you want. They were, mad Muslims. They were, SBU agents, whatever. This particular Telegram channel and 3 others have actually been traced back to the SBU in Ukraine. Rick asked me this the other night. How do we know that that's the case? We actually have Zelensky, and let me find his statement on this. Because I pulled these all out. Oh yeah, this Telegram channel, yes, you were correct earlier when we talked. It was taken off of Telegram, but it's reappeared under a different name. And they are requiring people to sign up before they will let you in to see what they're talking about. So they're trying to prevent like the FSB from seeing what's being said there. It doesn't
Do you happen
work.
to know the new name of the new Telegram channel?
I do, but I'm not going to help people out by pointing them at it.
I gotcha.
So
Okay.
we had that one. It currently has brand new 26,251 subscribers as of about a half hour ago. There's another one with a guy who almost sort of kind of looks like he's Muslim, except he's, wearing a ski cap, not the kind of attire they would normally wear. And it's calling for violence. And these channels are actually being pulled down. Now,
by whom?
We have
who's pulling them down? Any idea?
Apple, Google, Telegram, and the FSB is active in identifying these and reporting them.
I see.
So we have a blogger who his name's Ponomarev, and he's a foreign agent, and he was the owner of this Morning Dagestan channel. And he had a telephone conversation that was recorded with Arestovich in Ukraine and admitted the fact of coordinating the protest movements at the airport through the Telegram channels with the money that he was provided by Arestovich in Ukraine.
That's our money. Most likely, that's our money.
It's your money.
Yeah.
And, it says, this is how they are. First, the brothers come out and give the gas, and then they laugh at us. The provocateur who crippled dozens of Dagestani lives. This was the comment by a reader. It was actually one of his readers who exposed him on this. So the prosecutor general's office, him and another blogger, they've filed criminal charges against them according to the Russian Federation criminal code against extremist activities. Zelensky made a statement through Mikhail Podolyak, one of his spokesmen, and he has said that he has a strategy for defeating Russia. And there's the typical, we're going to have a series of defeats on the battlefield, the collapse of the Russian defense ministry, unauthorized return of military personnel to Russia after they have failures at the front. But the big one is massive internal unrest within Russia. And this is what Russians in general are viewing this as. This is Maidan 2023.
Yeah.
We have a relatively small group of extremists being turned up by money from the SBU instead of the CIA in Ukraine in 2014. So you get these few people who stir up a group of, like you say, the nationalists or, people who are willing to go along with the crowd and causing these problems. And this is what Russians view this as.
Interesting. Very interesting. Like you say, the way it's being spun by, Ukraine, by the Western media, especially this week, they've been saying it for several years now, and saying it a lot more since the war began, is they find a few Nazis or extremists in Russia, and then they have counter propaganda when the Russians talk about Ukraine's obvious Nazi problem. They say, well, yeah, but they got Nazis in Russia too. They say that Russia has an anti-Semitism problem. I'm going to show you a clip here from Ukrainian television, UATV. It's in English. And it's, obviously it's in English. So it's designed to impress a Western audience.
A Zelensky channel, by the way.
Yeah, it sure is. It's run by the Ukrainian government. So this is what they have to say about big bad Russia.
Anti-Semitism and racism are increasingly echoing in the hearts of Russians, from bold slogans we can repeat to manipulations on the subject of victory in World War II. And from the beginning of a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, some Russians moved on to undisguised calls for the destruction of entire states. Ukraine will become a secondary state that won't take part in anything, and we will take this land for ourselves.
This Nazi carrion, you ask what we will do with them, destroy, and we won't ask. Everything that has to do with it, we didn't finish them off in World War II, we'll finish them off now. It needs to be wiped off the face of the earth.
Whom, Ukraine?
Yes. Why is it needed?
What for?
Poland, simply to the hip.
The imperial ambitions of the Russians are fueled not only by propagandists on federal channels. They have been demonstrating military maps of the offensive against Europe for a long time and promising to incinerate it with a nuclear strike. Anti-Semitic and racist sentiments are also being voiced by the country's top leadership. A statement by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov about Hitler's alleged Jewish roots shocked the Israeli government. This is how he answered a question from a TV presenter of the Italian media about how President Volodymyr Zelensky could be a Nazi if he is a Jew. Israel is already demanding a public apology from Lavrov.
Well, I think that Hitler also had Jewish origins, so it means nothing. For a long time now we've been hearing the wise Jewish people say that the biggest anti-Semites are the Jews themselves. As we say, the family has its black sheep.
However, one should not expect denials from the mouth of Lavrov, experts say. After the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia's aggressive policy has reached its peak. The official Kremlin is no longer shy in expressions and shows its true face.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation explained on its website and posted an announcement on social networks that literally says they paid attention to the anti-historical statement of Israeli Foreign Minister Lapid. There is such a minister. This is the official stance. It was announced that yesterday the Israeli Foreign Ministry summoned the Russian ambassador. Apparently, he was presented with a note, and publicly we heard that they offered Lavrov to apologize, to take his words back into his mouth, but we haven't heard anything of the sort. Therefore, I do not see a reservation in this, not an accidental exaggeration. I think this is a change in Moscow's position.
Some experts attribute such rhetoric to Russia's potential loss in the war against Ukraine. Allegedly realizing its helplessness, the Kremlin is trying to keep its face, at least in front of an internal audience.
They are well aware that they are losing the war, and to create this aura that the whole world is against us and we are the only righteous people in this world. Obviously, this is a part of this technology. Everything else is irrationality. Because if Russia had thought rationally, its leadership, they would not have started a war with Ukraine.
Why are there so many people in Russia who want to exterminate enemies and use nuclear weapons against thousands of civilians? These are the consequences of decades of Putin regime's propaganda, experts explain.
Almost a quarter of a century of this darkness of Putin's obscurantism and propaganda and everything that accompanies it, because Russia in its current form is a rigid authoritarian system with totalitarian elements. That is, it could be described as totalitarian, but there are still some freedoms that have not been yet taken away, like freedom of access to the internet, freedom of entry and exit. It is limited for obvious reasons, but it still theoretically exists. As soon as they cancel it, it will be a complete totalitarian system. But as far as information and propaganda are concerned, it was an absolute lack of freedom all quarter of a century.
After the end of the war, directly on the battlefield, it will take more than a decade to treat Russians from propaganda, experts say. An example of the aftermath of World War II, started by Hitler's Germany, showed that the aggressor had been washing away traces of genocide and the murders of entire nations for generations.
The first treatment is our victory. The second step that should be taken is a so-called denazification. What Russia wanted to apply to Ukraine should be applied to their regime. Accordingly, this should be done through international tribunals. The regime itself has been condemned at the political level. At the legislative level in the Russian Federation, this sin must also be condemned. This will be a very long process.
And of course, as experts say, it will be necessary to get rid of the symbols of this war. Among them is the notorious letter Z, used today by Russians propagandists. Reported by Marina Stepanenko, Larissa Zubenko, UATV News.
Well, Kevin, what do you think about that? Is that the pot calling the kettle black, or is there something to these allegations? You tell me. You live there.
Well, Elinsky won't be able to go to the ooh because there won't be a letter anymore. So, you know, Rick and I talked about this a few nights ago. You know, yes, there's propaganda on all sides of the fence.
It's an information war, like your channel says.
It's an information war. And, you know, the only thing I can say about it is living here and dealing with it here. I see that if you compare the level of propaganda that Russia produces compared to the amount of propaganda that the United States and the rest of the West produces, the United States is king in propaganda, have been for years.
We're number one.
That's right. You're number one. The Ukraine war was the most propagandized operation in a long time. That was until Gaza and Israel came up. That is even worse. The propaganda that is out there for that conflict is much, much worse. Mm-hmm. So, yes, the Ukrainians it's a Ukrainian TV, and they're putting it out there for the Ukrainian people to keep them behind their special military operation.
Of course.
Yet you have, and I don't remember which guy it was, one of their heads of their military said just a couple of days ago that they have no chance to win this conflict with Russia, that it's time to start negotiating. But, you know, the Ukrainian government has puppet masters, and they aren't getting the, you know, the amount of attention that they were getting before Israel. You know, there was a comment that came out, 7 o'clock this morning, that there's concern amongst the US and European officials that the special military operation, they used war, has reached a stalemate, and there is no ability to continue providing aid to Ukraine. The Biden administration is also worried that Ukraine is running out of forces while Russia has a seemingly endless supply. Ukraine is also struggling with recruiting and has recently seen public protests about some of Zelensky's open-ended conscription requirements. Now, these are the things you are not going to hear on a Ukrainian television channel. We have a lot of friends there, and they do not hear these things. Everything they hear is how well the conflict is going for Ukraine. They're winning. They're taking back kilometers of territory. They never hear about the people who are dead. They just go missing, and mothers protest of, gee, where is my son? If he's dead, I want to be paid for his death according to their law. But because nobody knows where these guys are, these mothers, these daughters, these wives never get the salaries that they're due. They don't get paid the, you know, the life benefits. So people are starting to stir in Ukraine as well.
Interesting. I'm not surprised. Rick, do you want to chime in?
I think the on the surface, this stuff doesn't make sense, but it does make sense if you look at it from an aerial view, and you understand that, again, this anti-Semitism that we're seeing is not, it's postmodernist anti-Semitism. It is often it's without, you don't need the Jews to have it. For instance, Russia is aligning with Palestine and Hamas, which seems to be fascistic, but at the same time, the Israelis are being portrayed as the new Nazis, which also doesn't really make sense. So it's, you know, really these countries, they're like a bunch of gangsters. They act in their own best interests. Common people are cannon fodder, and they'll play these geopolitical games out, and a lot of people die in the process. You really need to dig down and look at the real politics under the surface to understand why all this stuff is playing out the way it's playing out. Sometimes somebody calling for peace really wants war. They just want peace for a while because it's an advantage to them to do that, or they'll align with an enemy because it's in their political interest to do so, because the enemy of their enemy is their friend for now until later. So these things, to people, it may not make sense, but it sort of does make sense.
What you said right there makes so much sense to me as a historian who studied especially the 20th century. The pogroms go back hundreds of years, especially across Europe. But in the 20th century, when we saw the pogroms, for example, after the Russian Civil War and after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, it wasn't just about the Jews. Like you just said, the Jews were a convenient scapegoat. Right. But it was about geopolitics. It was about stolen land. It was about a land dispute. And most of all, in that case, and again, I see this repeating in the 21st century right now, it was about communism. It was about the rise of communism and the fear that struck in the hearts of the capitalist countries, the fascist countries, as fascism was just being born over there. I just, after seeing that clip from Ukrainian television, accusing the Russians of being Nazis, when I look around Russia, and I look at Russia a lot, I don't see random gangs of Nazis parading through the streets of Moscow. I don't see that on the streets of St. Petersburg. But in Ukraine, you can't swing a dead cat, it seems, without hitting a Nazi. And in all the major cities, they're freaking everywhere. And so I have to counter that, what I consider to be BS. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in Russia. I'm just saying it doesn't exist at the levels that it exists in Ukraine. I want to show you a quick clip that kind of ties
before you do that, I want to address something there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Reality is Lavrov did make that statement. I don't remember the context of it.
It's about a year ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say actually went in one side, not the other. So
which happens. Damn. Maybe it'll come back to you while I
so
play
go
this
for
clip. This just kind of ties the past of Ukraine, the ugly past of Ukraine, and ties the past and the present together. Well, let's go to Lvov, however you want to pronounce it.
In 1939, Lviv, or Lvov at that time, was under Polish control. The Soviets came in 1939 and occupied the city and arrested a lot of people.
Очень много деятелей культуры, науки, духовенства было арестовано и брошено в тюрьмы. И вот в 1941 году, когда приходили немцы, как ненадежный элемент, этих всех людей расстреляли в львовских тюрьмах.
5 июля во Львове колоссальный погром. вызваны, конечно, инспирированы и подготовлены также нацистами.
They got ordinary Ukrainians to kill people, and it was pretty easy to convince them to do it. They opened up the prisons and they released a lot of the prisoners, but also uncovered the graves of people who had been killed there.
Было несколько десятков тел со следами страшных увечий. КГБ поработало.
Много в НКВД на службе было евреев.
They took a lot of pictures of this scene and spread propaganda that this was what the Jews had done.
Ну и вы можете себе представить реакцию людей, которые узнали своих родных и близких.
Word spread very quickly about this.
Погром страшный, 5000 человек погибло, которые никакого отношения к тюрьме Бригитки, естественно, не имели.
Jews were rounded up out of their houses and beaten and stripped and shot and murdered in other ways as well.
Я не знаходжу собі місця, вибігаю з дому, цілу ніч мандрую вулицями міста.
When I've traveled out to the West, I couldn't believe the anti-Semitism that I saw out there. In Lviv, it seems like it's natural.
Що ви думаєте зараз про ситуацію в Україні між євреями і українцями, про відносини між ними?
О, ні, я вам не скажу.
Чи вони є?
Ні. Ви далі, не євреї, а жиди, все.
The situation has gotten quite scary here, pretty bad, to the point where the rabbi feels he can't walk in the city without bodyguards because he'll get harassed. I've also noticed a lot more swastikas around the city. The problem is that it remains. It remains for tourists to come and see all the swastikas in Lviv. It remains for any Jews who are here to walk by and see their religious symbols on hangmen. And people, everyday ordinary people, just walk by and that becomes normal. And when hate crimes and hate graffiti becomes normal, that's a sign of the sickness of society.
Конечно, некрасиво. Вообще заборы обрисовывать некрасиво.
Attitude, simply condemnation.
I think it's terrible, and actually I know some of my friends actually do this, and it's so difficult to convince them that it's wrong.
У мене був однокласник єврей.
І що ти, як ти думаєш, в класі, як до нього ставилися так само, як до всіх інших?
Ні, так же само, не дуже. Коротше, обзивали дуже часто євреїв.
Стереотипи, вони мають причини. Значить, якщо люди так ставляться до євреїв, значить євреї десь з того заслужили.
І як вони там, євреї, термози.
Я не вважаю себе антисемітом, тому що в наших колах десь ходить така приказка. Антисеміт – це той, хто не любить євреїв більше, ніж вони того заслуговують.
Всі почали до нього погано ставитися?
Не всі.
Не всі, але багато почали.
Так.
Та нема національної ворожнечі. От вийдіть от зараз тут на вулиці, кричіть «Я єврей». Я не думаю, що хтось підійде, вас буде бити за то.
Здивується гарантія.
Скоріше...
Просто здивується, так.
Здивується так само, якби ви кричали, що я голубий, чи я там...
Це жит. Він не вірить в Бога. Це життя арабів.
Oh, yeah, those are the children.
Yeah, you know, what I see in this video is it's really hard to follow them in it because they start out with the Nazis were doing this, and then they blame the Soviet army. And then they show what the Soviet army did as filmed by a German Nazi.
Right.
And
but they made it look that way, but that was not the Soviets doing that.
Yeah, well, and you didn't have Germans walking around
doing that.
Yeah, you didn't have Germans walking around with video cameras while the Soviet army was there.
Right. It was misleading in that way.
Yeah. No, they also kind of skewed what people were saying. You know, yes, there is a lot of it there. They have a lot of the, you know, band rights in that region. You know, it was Polish. So it wasn't even part of the Soviet Union originally. But you had some people, well, it's not bad. Some it's, calling them names. We have that everywhere. We have it in Russia. We have it in the United States. We have it in Canada. We have it in Europe. There's just a group of people who are intolerant of others. There's people in the States who are intolerant of blacks. So it's all, unfortunately, if you go out to make a film, I can go out on the street today and I can pick any neighbor that I want and ask them about any of this, and they have no problem with anybody. But if I'm looking to find somebody who is anti-whatever, I can find them and I can make a film about it. And then classify it as everybody here is like that. So this is the problem with propaganda.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.